Good afternoon, my name is Olena, and I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. Our first briefing today is dedicated to the operation of the financial system of Ukraine. Within this period, all of us have accumulated a number of questions. We all feel the prices are growing. We understand that the financial system may be unpredictable during the war, so we've invited a specialist to our studio who can explain us how the system works, what should we expect, what will be the exchange rate of the US dollar, and other questions. Our guest today is Olena Korobkova, chair of the board of the Independent Association of the Banks of Ukraine. Good afternoon, Ms. Olena. Good afternoon. Ms. Olena, can you tell us what's going on with the payment capacity of Ukrainians? What's going on with the prices? What should we expect for in the financial system of Ukraine? Thank you for the question. So, after the shock of the year 2022, the salaries of Ukrainians are back growing. The stabilization of wealth also assists to the slowdown of inflation that we are observing now. And thanks to all those two processes, the nominal inflation and nominal salary minus inflation and the average salary is growing. So the level of salaries corresponds to the one that existed before the full-scale invasion of the 2022. However, there is a lot of jobs that were destroyed by the war in Ukraine. That's a complex problem that should be solved using complex approaches. But talking about the nominal salary, we expect it to grow about 20% more by the end of the year. So the average salary for the time being is 17,700 hryvnias per month. And the fact of existence of internally displaced persons, how did it influence the job market? You know, there was a statistics published recently that the employment of internally displaced persons does not exceed 30%. And given the total amount of population, of working age population, not more than 70% are employed currently. Does it influence the growth of the salaries in any way? And in what way does it destabilize or stabilize the financial system? Well, thank you. It's a real good question. In fact, I agree with the studies that you're referencing. Really, currently we have a lot of internally displaced people in the country, but this fact is compensated by those people who left the country, now mostly women and children and their grandparents maybe. So the problem really is that not all of them can get employed. However, there are state programs in place to support them. There are banks that actively support the relocation of businesses starting from March 2022, when the businesses were relocated from the areas where the battle operations were most active. Those businesses are relocated mostly to the west of Ukraine. The banks learned to do it in a steady and quick way. And there is progress observed in this area. So now the main question is how to bring the Ukrainians back home, how to solve the issue with the destroyed property, with the destroyed vehicles. So those are the main questions that are supposed to be solved today, because there are certain problems with the insurance companies. Nobody wants to assume the risks and to ensure Anybody? Well, you've mentioned that the inflation is slowing down. Can you give us the figures, please, at least comparing to the previous period? And is there any forecast as to the inflation processes by the end of this year? As we see currently, the central bank interest rate is going to be reduced. The National Bank of Ukraine started it with an important step, reduction from 25 to 22%, and by the end of the year we expect another hike. The National Bank announces the interest rate at the level of 18-19%, which means that it will result in the market rates going down as well. So talking about inflation, in the beginning of this year, the inflation was 26%. In June, this indicator went down to 12.5%, and in July at 11.6%. By the end of this year, we expect the inflation to slow down to 10%, which means the stabilization and significant slowdown of inflation, which results from the fixed exchange rate, the restriction of administratively regulated tariffs, apart from electric power tariffs. So the Ukrainians currently are feeling some relief from the shocks. So talking about the exchange rate that you just mentioned, what is the rate we should expect within the months to follow? Is it still going to be fixed or switched back to fluctuating? So the exchange rate is still fixed, and it's less likely for the National Bank of Ukraine to switch to flexible exchange rate. However, such plans exist for the medium and long-term perspective. So given the continuation of international financial support, the rate will remain or the exchange rate will remain at the same level, which will allow the National Bank of Ukraine to grow its currency reserves. For example, we've received $5.3 billion of support in July this year, and within the period of war we've received about 60 billion United States dollars. The foreign currency reserves are currently at the level of $41.7 billion. It's the historical record. But if we correct it against the dollar inflation, previously there were cases when in current prices back in 2008, 2011, the currency reserves peaked at about $50 billion. So we should not expect any liberalization of the exchange rate shortly. The short-term task, given the unsolved problem with the export of the agricultural products. Last year, within the last marketing period, Ukraine exported 49 million tons of grain, which was another record. If this problem won't be solved, the next marketing year, which starts from the 1st of July, the indicators will be different. So now we're seeing the street rate at the same level, about 38 hryvnias per dollar, which is not substantially different from the national bank rate. So the forecast as to the dollar corridor is within the limits of 37.5, 39 hryvnias per dollar. That's the corridor for the month to follow. So one of the main sources of the foreign currency coming to Ukraine was the transfers by the people working abroad. So are there any details about people still sending money from abroad to their relatives in Ukraine? Well, there is no official statistics about that so far, but we know that previously, during pre-war time, about $7 billion were sent to Ukraine per year. Now this indicator is lower, and now we see that money is not only sent by the people to their relatives in Ukraine, but the other way around. The people transfer money from Ukraine abroad to their families. So we shouldn't pay a lot of attention to this indicator, as it's not so informative for the time being. Well, to wrap up our conversation about the incomes of Ukrainians, you say that the salaries are growing, but we see that the prices are significantly growing too. We understand that the food basket has changed in terms of its components and in terms of its price. So can you comment on any figures in this regard? Talking about the cost of the food basket, we as a banking system are currently in the face of moderate optimism, and the expectations for the prices to change shortly are quite low. We don't see any preconditions for that, so everything will remain at the same level as it is now. Thank you. So let's talk about the banking system a little bit. What's going on with the lending and deposits of Ukrainians with the banks? How stable is the banking system generally? So let me start with the last part of your question. Currently, the banking system is as financially stable as never. I'm going to give you just a couple of indicators to confirm it. First is the capital ratios. We have capital adequacy ratio M2 and N3. Overall capital ratio, we should be at 7%. So as of the 1st of July, both indicators in the system were twice as bigger as their normative measure, and now there is a tendency to the growth of those indicators. So N2 has grown up to 27 within half a year, and N3 from 13.1 to 14. There is one state bank that does not comply with those standards, but it's not a matter of concern, because the government is not going to leave the bank on their own as the main shareholder. NPL ratio as of the 1st of July was 39% of all the extended loans. Before the war, this indicator was at 29.5%. However, currently this trend, the growth of NPL has stopped. That's a positive trend to liquidity of the banking system. Now there is an extremely high level of liquidity in the banking system. Since the beginning of the year 2023, the total amount of liquidity, which means the residues in correspondent accounts with the banks plus the deposit certificates, has grown from 500 to 700 billion hryvnias, which means the banking system currently has a very strong capacity reserve. In fact, the banks are full with customers' money that have no lot of places to be placed at. The income of the banking system received 76.6 billion of income as of 1st July this year. Only 3 banks had the losses of 112 million in total. So to summarize the condition of the banking system is currently financially stable, over liquid. The banks uninterruptedly continue providing services. They preserve the full range of products and services for their customers, and it all assists to the financial stability of Ukraine. So there is no reasons for concerns about the bank's health. And talking about lending, starting from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the total amount of the loan portfolio was reducing, which was related to the season of lending or suspension of lending by the banks, the new loans. So to say, the lending paces are below the pace of write-offs of the old loans. So the amount of lending reduced 4.8% in hryvnia and 8.5% in foreign currency, from 6.9 to 6.3 billion dollars, and the amount of hryvnia loans to the population reduced from 196 billion to 195.1 billion hryvnias. And within the latest survey about the conditions of lending expected within the years to come, there were reasons for so-called cautious optimism. And within the next 4 quarters, we expect the amount of loans to businesses and population to grow. For the banks, it is supported by the softening of the standards by the banks and their requirements to the borrowers. Miss Olena? Oh, there is a communication breakdown. Well, I'm back hearing and seeing you. Yeah, so the connection is back on. And maybe my last question, does it mean that currently the businesses are facing some problems in receiving the loans? Because for the survival of economy, it's important to support the economy and the businesses in this condition. So this reduction of lending, is it related to the reduction of business operations or complication of the access to the loan funds? Well, there are 2 aspects. First of all, the banks don't understand whom to lend the money to, because the businesses permanently, like every day we start our day with the news from the front. After every air raid alert, we don't know what facility was targeted. We don't know whether they were the customers of our bank, whether their facilities were damaged, can their operations be resumed promptly. So there is no confidence. There is no confidence that today this loan is being served normally, and tomorrow the bank may be left with the collateral. So it's an open question, and there is no simple answer to that. The businesses, they really have many problems, and the banks allow some concessions because currently they operate not in the money-making regime, but in the regime of building reliable partners, the one who gives a saving shoulder, a lending hand, who help not only the banks now, not only help their customers, but Ukraine in general. So yes, there is a number of problems, but there is some percentage of businesses that were forced to either shut down or move abroad. There are cases like that too, and they are quite numerous. So it's an open question, and obviously after our victory, I hope that it will be happening quite shortly. It will be the full renewal, because the demand is expected to grow. Everybody wants to work, but it's also the matter of interest rates. As I mentioned, there is a trend of the reduction of interest rates after the reduction of national bank interest rates, so we expect the situation to improve. We have, as I said, we have reasons for cautious optimism for the 4 quarters to come. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the questions from the floor. Please introduce yourself. Vladislav Obuch, Ukraine 4. You've mentioned that for the banking system of Ukraine, there are no threats to its stability. But talking about specific banks, are there any signals, any indicators that something may result in their withdrawal from the market after the stress testing or after the investigation of the miscoding cases, or there are no risks like that and no turbulence is expected in the Ukrainian banking system, given that the banks are currently in the zone risks? They are smaller than the Sense Bank that was recently nationalized by Ukraine. Thank you. So I'll start from the end. Really, there are no reasons for turbulence in the financial market of Ukraine. There are no reasons for concerns about the health of the banking system of Ukraine. Talking about the miscoding cases investigation, the banks that you're talking about, they have a small share in the market, so it won't be affecting the operation of the financial system in general, since they are non-systemic banks. So there are no reasons for concerns about the financial stability, because the reserve of capacity supports the financial stability, the resilience of the banks, and the challenges for the long-term war, well, I would say the other way around. It prepares us for the full-scale resumption of lending in Ukraine in general, so really there are no reasons for concerns. Good afternoon. I'm a correspondent of Latvian radio in Ukraine, and my question is, in May this year, the National Bank of Ukraine has started the evaluation of the bank resilience to determine the real condition of the banking sector in the conditions of the wartime. Are there any interim results of this assessment? Thank you. Thank you for your question. Your Ukrainian is great. It's real pleasant to hear the foreign colleagues speaking like this. I think that it's more of a question to the National Bank of Ukraine, and we will only be able to comment it later as we see those results. Thank you. I'm having another question regarding the coordination between Ukrainian commercial banks and the state banks, given the specifics of the martial law, for example, as to stimulating of lending or any recovery programs that are expected to be implemented. Well, their recovery programs are the responsibility of the Ministry of Economy, and there is a number of such programs like 369 or e-housing, and yet more programs are being developed. The joint operations are being coordinated through the Entrepreneurs Association, and as you know, there are meetings going on between the National Bank of Ukraine and the top 30 banks of Ukraine, where the joint actions and operations are being discussed for the systemically important banks. There is an operational headquarters deployed, that is operation of which is also coordinated by the National Bank of Ukraine. So all the decisions are being taken quite promptly. Thank you very much. I'm reminding you, joining us was Olena Korobkova, the chair of the board of the Independent Association of the Banks of Ukraine, and you're following the briefings in Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform. Thank you for joining us. Our next event starts in